Welcome to the Analytical Intelligence Podcast, brought to you by Enchilada with Alex Lovelace and Pete Hodge. Join us on a journey of data exploration, delving into analytics in business, generative AI's influence, and navigating the complexities of the data terrain. So welcome back. We're going to have another conversation broadly themed around AI again, and analysis and analytics. And we've spent a lot of the last week or two researching various themes around AI analysis, AI in general, large language models, generative AI, and we just wanted to come back together and share what we've found. And so I think, Pete, you had a few things you wanted to kick off with. Let's just dive in on one of them and see where we go.
Yeah, one of them I thought was quite indicative of the space, and already we're a year in, so it's quite good. So what I did was there was a video by a guy who wasn't a coder or anything for his main job. He's a journalist who teaches analytics in journalism. So that's quite an interesting cross. And he produced a couple of videos using ChatGPT and something called Notable. And at the time, this was last summer, sort of July, August time, that was one of the early ways you could get code into ChatGPT and get it to actually do some analysis. Sorry, not on the code, but on the data itself. So he basically seems to do, from what I can gather, does a class with students where he goes through some data, and he was using some police data on bike thefts, and then talks about some of the pitfalls of the analysis and some of the graphics you can produce. And he sort of does a few of those pieces on this video, which is about half an hour or so long. He does a few of them actually. And it's quite a good introduction to the capabilities. And he does exactly that. He loads up I think he uses a CSV, downloads a CSV, loads it up, uses the sort of Notable tool to get the data there as an interface. And basically what's going on behind the scenes, some of the things we've talked about. I think Notable was effectively, handling the data, and then when you ask a question, he would say, can you give me the peak times of bike theft? And then behind the scenes, that's using ChatGPT to break that down into some language. It's then going off and curating a specific pandas query in something like Matplotlib, and is then going off and executing that code.
So let's, before you go on, let's be clear though, because I watched this video too, and what you see on the screen is the tool that he's using doing the analysis, right, based on natural language queries. So the bit with the Matplotlib and Python and stuff is opaque to the end user. So from that perspective, if you didn't know what you were looking at, you would be perfectly okay to believe that the LLM, in this case GPT or ChatGPT, was doing the analysis.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And it is your analysis of that that leads you to believe, after looking at the tools involved, that isn't what's happening, right? And this alludes back to what we were covering. I believe it was in the first episode we did on AI. That what actually happens there is that the natural language query is turned into another natural language query, really, in the background to solicit some code from ChatGPT. In this case, we assume Python. I think it must have been Python, right?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Which says, give me the code to ingest a CSV or whatever that was into pandas.
Yeah.
And then do something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so GPT itself did not do any of that.
No, exactly. And actually follows the other couple of videos he did. go through that, and he actually sort of has a quick browse into the API calls that are happening. So he actually breaks that down and shows you which bit is doing what. So yeah, he actually goes through that.
Okay. Okay. So, but the tool itself is aimed at actually just allowing you to do analysis.
Yeah,
Right?
and that was his complete thrust. So, he's saying, basically I teach analysis and I know the data and I'm looking for these sorts of graphs. And for him, the Python coding, as he admits, is not something that he particularly does. He does it because he has to. It's a way for him as an analyst to get to that data and produce graphs which he knows are there. And he's after specific sorts of graphs because he knows that they tell a certain story which he's trying to get to. And so he was going, this is really good because I'll know a few basic ones, but I can now ask for more complex things which I know are going to help me, and it will now do them. I now don't have to spend 2 or 3 hours fiddling around in Python, changing colors, getting it to how I want. I can just say, oh, actually, can you make those colors more distinct or more pastel, and it's going to do it for me, and it comes back in 30 seconds, and I haven't spent 2 hours searching Stack Overflow and so forth. And clearly is not somebody that wants to get into that. So whereas you and I might go, oh, well, that's an interesting little challenge and we're off. Quite rightly, he's like, no, I just want the graph. And it made me think about, times in my life where I've been doing that sort of work and you start to stray into something, you've got a job to do, you're starting to stray into something, you found a way that gives you a way to do it, and you start to go down that rabbit hole and you think, right, okay, I've got to get this job done by 4 o'clock. I think this is going to get me there, but I'm now getting into issues which, are not going to go into my presentation. And you sort of have to make a decision, right? Do I carry on and I could spend another hour and not get the answer I want? Or shall I just cut short here? I've got 2 graphs. I wanted to put them into one. I'll go with 2 graphs because I know I've got two and I haven't got time to fiddle to get it into one. So, it feels like the cherry on top. And so you prioritize because you don't want to spend that time trying to debug the problems of the code to get 2 graphs into one, for example. And so I've definitely been in that position, and I would tend to compromise and go, well, I've got something that's working. I'll go with what's working rather than carrying on. Because something like, so what he's saying is, well, it's where he doesn't want to get into the Python and get sucked into the 2 hours of getting the right colors. So I'm sure he would have gone, well, yeah, look, I've got 2 graphs. It tells the story. I'll go with that. But actually, really, what he wanted him in one. And so I definitely was on his wavelength of, he kind of knows what he wants. He knows what he can get. But I don't want to spend the time in this tool working it out. And now he's got something that's giving him that out. And then he's going, oh, well, could you give me that? Could you graph it in this way? And it does. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Really good. And so what that is for him is an access into getting something out via Python that I'm not willing to spend the time on. But the key, as you're mentioning there, is he's not trying to write Python. He's trying to get graphs of data, and that's the key difference.
Yeah, and so this person is an analyst of some sort, or someone who would do analysis, and roughly knows in advance what they want. And I think that's the key, that you know what's in the data set and you know what you want. And I've no doubt that tweaks to it. Oh, can you make this line blue instead of red or something? Can I have it all on a black background? Probably there are tweaks that can be made like that, but maybe you'll end up confusing the machine. But one hopes that the prompts behind that tool, are smart enough to be able to allow for certain levels of ambiguity or tweaking or reworking. I think that, so where we're getting at here is that there is, if you think that there's a continuum between, at one end, I've never seen a graph before. Well, what is data? What is Excel? And at the other end, I'm the ultra data science nerd, statistician, live and breathe, and there's a graduation in between there of different skills levels and aptitude, and indeed, volition.
Yeah.
And what tools like that do, and indeed stuff like I guess now ubiquitous Power BI, but Tableau or whatever, ClickView, those things have been trying to do for arguably decades now, is bring the practice of visualizing and to a degree interrogating and extracting value from data closer to the less experienced analyst end, shall we say. I mean, there's certain people out there that really don't know, don't care, and never will. There's a certain point you get down that continuum where you've got someone who can handle Excel, knows what a table of data really represents, and wants to get something out of it, but either doesn't have the time or doesn't have any interest in taking on those skills, right? And a lot of that end of things can be mopped up by canned dashboard pre-made views of data that they're very aware of, and we're not really talking about those people there. So we can take that sort of end of the spectrum away. If all you ever need is, oh, here's my sales report, I don't need anything else, then they don't need this either, right? It's the people that want to go one step further and say, well, why is my sales like that? Or but that's sales, but what was my conversion, or something, right? Whatever it is, that level that they might not have, and want to go and get some more out of it. So they're saying, well, okay, I've got the data, so I can feed that into ChatGPT or whatever other tool sits on top of that and get some sort of summary view. And they will know what they're after. And it's not that different from going to your BI technician and saying, yeah, can I have a view like this that does that, right?
Yeah.
And that person trots off and does it, right?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, it's on your dashboard or it gets sent to you in some form.
Yeah.
And this is sort of taking that middleman out and allowing people to go directly into the data. And it may be data that they're familiar with, or perhaps and a slightly more, and I think this feels like one of these use cases, slightly more advanced user, which is I have this new set of data. I know what it represents. I've not analysed it before. I don't know what I'm going to find, but I do know that this column means this column means this, and that means that. So if I, pivot that, I should get what I want, right? And that tells me how many bike thefts there are, right?
Yeah.
And so it feels like it's edging those users closer to the, the data nerd end, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned Excel there, and I think Excel is a great way to illustrate this example.
Gateway drug, you mean?
Yes, indeed, into analytics. But it's a great example because a lot of people, if you take a team of 8 or 10 people, I think most of us experience where there's always one person who's a little bit better than everybody else, and if you get a team of 20, you usually get one person who's very good at it, for whatever reason, and so you'll get that person, and so the guy who's the real expert is, like you say, is the sort of has got a real good feel for it, and that's probably what we're talking about here. But what's interesting is Excel is such a usable tool, in that if you just even have a little bit of curiosity and a bit of time, you can start getting yourself into some half decent trouble. And I think this example we're talking about plays into those people as well, because you might go, okay, well, I've got to spend half an hour. Well, I've seen someone do this, and I've got these numbers. I wonder if I could do that with quick look up, a couple of searches on different formulas to use, and go, oh, okay, it's not half bad. That's kind of what I wanted. Again, if you've got that half an hour, now suddenly you're going to be able to go, well, a lot further. Can you load this data up, and bang, it's done it for me. I'll do a lot more in that half an hour. So not only is it opened it up to those people who are pretty good at it, I think it lowers the barrier of entry to people who are just aware of it. And I think they're the two levels. And I've come across this before in terms of learning levels, where you break it into four, where you've got the, and it goes with, I think it's environmental, not environment, but situational management. And so you get the sort of level one is you're really keen because you don't know what you don't know. You see a subject, oh yeah, that looks really easy. Oh yeah, I can do that. And then you go up to the next level, and then your motivation goes down because you realise what you don't know and you're unpracticed at it. Then you start doing it and you go up to the next level. So you become practiced, but you're unconfident because you haven't sort of done it enough, and you seem to have it working. And then you get to mastery, which is both practiced and confident and teaching others. And I think this, is aimed at those lower two levels. Probably not so much, for people that go, oh yeah, that sounds easy. Well, that's great. ChatGPT's got to make some of that easy, and then you can get up to the level one, i.e., well, actually, I can see some of this stuff, and I've got a tutor helping me here, but I don't think it's going to really take you into level two, which is going to getting into practice, because well then you're going to have to spend some real time in there. And I think that's where the level where you and I use these tools and we go, yeah, getting me to a level which I'm already at some time ago is great. It doesn't really save me that much time, and it's not helping me that much, getting up to the next level, because they start to falter somewhat.
Well, you made a point in there about the way about using Excel, and then we take this particular tool, right, which is it obfuscates the interaction with your language model.
Yeah.
But either Excel or you could be trying to use a Python notebook or something. But what the other option is stick with Excel. Well, I want a formula that does thing A, B, and C. You go and type that into ChatGPT and then paste it into your formula box, or you have a conversation going, well, how do I do this pivot and then summarize, right? Or you go and ask ChatGPT, it gives you instructions, you follow those, right? And there's something lost in between these two versions of the world, right? Because in the version where you merely conduct a conversation with ChatGPT, you might actually be learning something, right?
Yeah.
And if you read everything that ChatGPT will give you back when you ask a question, it's pretty much trained to tell you why you've done it, unless you tell it not to, right?
Yeah.
And so you might not read that, you might just cut and paste, you might just breeze through it, and in which case, some sort of tool that cuts out that particular middleman is of value, right? But you're not moving much further forward in terms of the pathway towards being a data scientist, for example, right? Which is what you're saying. And so all the while there's these tools coming out that are obfuscating that process, people may be getting better at how to think about analysis, and they may be empowered to do more analysis. But what you're saying is there's a level to which, if you haven't followed that path in terms of learning what's going on, then you're going to hit a wall, right? In terms of what you're able to do and what you're able to ask a language model to do. Now, it's arguable that if these companies providing these chatbot services on top of the models, if they are doing their job properly, then their middleware will drag that line further and further and further, right?
Yeah.
So in the future, what we're really saying here is that if you consider sort of a middle tier data scientist analyst with some proper chops who can do, Python, Ninja, like could build you a neural network, random forests coming out their ears, all this business, that we could in theory have a point to which the ability of these middleman applications can completely eradicate the need for any absolute understanding of what's going on under the hood, purely natural language, and get someone to the point where they have a level of sophistication that they're using clustering over text data or something like that, right? and I think, you know, there's some clear pushback on that view of the world, right?
Yeah.
And we can come to that, but I think the point here is, yes, can you drag that line further? No doubt. Can you
Yeah.
drag it right up to middle tier data scientist? I think that's a different conversation,
Yeah.
right?
And I think I think that line gets dragged the other way, i.e., the barrier of entry becomes lower and lower. In other words, it's easier and easier to use these tools. You need less and less knowledge. So in this example around being an analyst and asking the analytical questions, well, one of the keys there is, well, okay, well, here are the questions to ask. So that I think, you know, it will get pushed a long way down that line. So you go, okay, well, so I don't need to be much of an analyst anymore, because now I've got a framework that says, oh, what data have you got? And you say, oh, I've got this sort of data. Oh, what sort of things do you want to know? You go, well, I don't really know. Oh, well, here are 5 good questions. Okay, but give me the answer to those 5 questions. Now I'm not even an analyst. I'm just sort of going, yeah, that seems to be person. And I can see these tools really getting pushed down there. And again, so that barrier of entry gets lower and lower. And this leads to that point of, so going and doing something to that first couple of levels is going to become really easy. And I think that's, you know, and that's going to come across. So we're talking specifically here about, you know, data analysis, but it could be applied to anything where this tool is. So somebody that's an expert is going to go, yeah, well, I'm not going to use that much. Okay, fair enough. But somebody who's not an expert, who might need to do a little bit of your job on the side, will suddenly be able to execute to a reasonable level, not to an expert level. But of course, we all know in business, it's not about doing the expert level in something. It's about doing it as good enough. So you take that to your boss or to the group that you're doing a report for, and they say, I don't get this, you know, and you go, when you're a bit burnt and you've got to do better. Or they go, oh yeah, that's really good. All we really wanted it to do was to show that we're going to get some return on investment. And, you know, I can see the graph here. Yeah, great, job done. You know, and that's what a lot of people's roles involve. You know, they're going after, they're using a tool as a short-term means to an end. And they might repeat this, but probably not.
So there's an obvious parallel to this, and it's almost the there's nothing new to see here angle and argument, which I can't decide whether I'm being devil's advocate here or actually I think I really mean this, but this isn't new in the sense that I've got a leaky tap, right? And so I'm going to go onto YouTube and I'm going to find a video or probably Google it, which will point me towards YouTube video on how to fix a leaky tap,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And chances are I'm not gonna cause too much chaos. And I'm probably not going. I mean, I'm not going into electricianry because you can die. I've no doubt you can manage to kill yourself with plumbing too. But I assume a leaky tap is relatively safe and achievable. But that does not make me a plumber, right?
Exactly.
And so there is that argument there that, and then that's partly what we're saying, right? This is not a new conversation. In that, what we're saying is that now there is a way to do things like analysis and as you point out, what it can be widened out to all sorts of things in our world, coding, application coding, whatever that is.
Yeah.
That now you know, can be done by people who couldn't do before. And now maybe 20 years ago a plumber would have seen that and gone, my livelihood is trashed, because now you can get everything you need on plumbing on YouTube. Whereas and maybe plumbers lost out on lots of small jobs that they probably didn't want to do anyway. There's a whole bunch of ambient small work that probably is, there's less of those jobs around at the moment. What I know, this isn't obvious, and it's not a parallel at all, but as an aside, plumbers are hard to get still.
Indeed.
They're very, very busy.
Yeah.
So that livelihood didn't disappear, but they might have lost out on some smaller jobs because of that. But it isn't the case then that I've fixed my tap and I'm thinking, well, oh, I'm going to replace the boiler now, right?
Yeah.
That's not a thing, right? I think perhaps someone decided that, but they almost certainly ended up with a more expensive plumbing job after trying it. And so the I think where we're getting here is that there is a degree to which people might edge further down that route, and so it isn't, but that isn't necessarily a problem. I think we've always wanted them to do that stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know, why are you asking me for this line chart when I can build you a neural network, right?
Yeah.
To be slightly facetious, right?
Yeah.
And so actually we're fine with that, but what we're also saying is the idea that now you are a few prompts away from being a data scientist is not really the reality that we're in, and some of you might, right? But if you are, you're not using these WYSIWYG tools, you're having a conversation with ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
And you're using that middleman and learning as you go along.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's been the case for BI in the BI space for years. And I think that in this particular case, it is quite like plumbing, right? In the these tools have been available to do more with your data via things like Power BI and Tableau and Click. And they've been increasingly trying to make these things easier and easier and easier, but the adoption hasn't been good, right? Because actually people don't really want to be doing it. They might want, oh, can I just quickly do this in Excel and get this chart because I haven't got time to phone the BI department, right? I just want this done now, and maybe they will, and maybe they'll use ChatGPT to help them do it, maybe, and almost certainly, right?
Yeah.
But they've had capabilities like this for decades now, and my experience is almost no one, nothing has closed that gap. There's still a big gap between business users and technical users, BI technicians, data scientists, whatever. That gap hasn't been closed, with the arguable exception of the scientific community, which I think is a slightly different conversation. We're very much talking about the business community. I think the scientific community is a slightly different beast.
Yeah. And it's one of the other things that low barrier of entry gives, which I think which plays into what we're seeing quite a lot is or more last year, and I think it's beginning to peter out, is that, you know, that real excitement, like, wow, you know, I couldn't do this before, now I can do it, you know, and there's that sort of sudden excitement and that sort of, oh great, I don't have to go and ask someone else to do it, I just use this tool that's using a model on the back end and I can ask it to do things and it's going to do it for me. Great, I don't have to go to the X team and wait for that to happen, I can do it myself. And so on that front, what was interesting is that these videos were from last summer. So I thought, oh, great. I wonder how he's got on with that. You know, he was really excited, saying how some of the capabilities. And he only made the videos because he didn't have a channel going or anything. He made these videos because it was, well, look, you know, I'm teaching this, and then this tool's come along that enabling me to do a little bit more. And, you know, talk to my students about that. And there's been no more videos, which is sort of interesting. Could be a whole bunch of reasons for that. But if it was something which was really then taking on to that next level and that next level, then surely you keep getting excited. But I think, you know, you get that initial excitement, you can do something. But as we're saying, this guy is like, well, I don't want to be a Python programmer. It's probably done as much as I need to. It's fairly low level. Because if he got to much higher levels, I'm pretty sure he would have posted more things. So it sort of goes, okay, well, you know, again, it's that barrier to entry, getting to level 1 and 2, fairly straightforward, but getting more advanced, well, didn't seem to happen. So that plays into that. And then there's the other thing that you mentioned, that now I can do that. It gets the job done. So if that was in a work context, I need to produce something, I can now produce that, and perhaps I don't need to do something like that for another 2 or 3 months. So I'm not taking anyone else's job. But as we know from the productivity of the last 30 or 40 years through technology, is, if enough people do that, well, that team is perhaps less busy. But when that job comes around again, whose job is it now to do that? Well, they're calling me because they're saying, oh, well, Pete produced this great chart last time. Oh, can you do that again? Well, it's not really. Yeah, but I just need it this once. So, like many of the productivity gains, we don't have a typing pool anymore, so you don't have to type letters. Well, who has to do the typing now? Oh, well, I do. Hold on, no one put that in my job description. No one put typing in it. Yet that's something which wasn't there 40, 50 years ago. You dictate a letter and then give it to the typing pool. You get it back at the end of the day. Now I have to write my own email. Well, in fact, now I'm doing tons of them. So what's interesting there is that I think this allows people, the sort of dabblers and the tinkerers especially, who don't mind getting their hands dirty, the jack of all trades, to do a little bit more. But of course, the downside of that is you get to be good at any number of things, and people aren't going to go to the team who've got a big queue of this stuff. They're going to come to you because you're on the team and you can get it done in the next few days, right? So again, we're into that productivity gain. Yes, I'm more efficient, but I'm just doing more. And quite often, this isn't that we'll lose a bunch of people. It's that actually we're all just doing that little bit more. I've now got 12 things on my 5 to-do list. I've just added one more. And the team that was there that was doing this is still just as busy. So all that's happened is the company produces that little bit more, but everyone feels even more busy than they were prior to that. So this kind of, and that starts to play into this whole narrative around, AI is coming, we're all losing our jobs. Like, really? I know you're excited about it because you've seen it do something which you weren't able to do before, but really, how much of that do you do? How much of that is done by a person whose only job is to do that? And then how good is it really going to get you? Are you getting to a point where you're world class in this? Probably not. I mean, you've got a BI team because they've got to do this stuff at scale, right? And they've got to bring in, data from different parts of the organization, which might be really messy. You are not going to do that. You're going to be doing it with data which is already pretty clean. And when someone says, "Oh, can you do it with this?" You're going to go, "Well, this data looks a bit iffy." And someone's going to say, "Oh, well, what can you do with that?" You can say, "Well, can't do anything with it. I don't have the skills to do that."
Well, I think that it's arguably slightly more alarming than that because um, because this stuff is easy, and we have seen this in the Excel verse.
Yeah.
How many multiple times removed from source data Excel spreadsheets used as BI business reporting instances have you seen? And then you've done some sort of provenance analysis on it. If you can even find that, and the data that you're seeing is just wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's just been warped or mutated, either deliberately but usually accidentally, and it's just wrong, right? And the risk here is that, oh well, okay, I've got the same source data set as you. I can get ChatGPT to help me make some sense of that, and you're not putting in the sort of safeguards that a good analyst, data scientist would, and and chat some form of chat agent will quite happily roll that data up for you, but it didn't say, oh, did you mean to remove, you've got Island of Ireland in there, did you want to remove that, right? Oh, you've got a mix of dollars and pounds in here, right?
Yeah.
Or you do realize that, some of your place names are capitalized and some aren't, right? And all the stuff that we would see, like even eyeballing data for a matter of seconds,
Yeah.
they're going, well, all that's got to be cleared up. And that's part of the expertise. I think, we don't want to be doing a lot of that. I don't want to put that at the top of my list of things that, I'll be remembered for. He could recognize capitalized place names on my tombstone. But, we do this stuff because we've been doing it for years. And at this most basic level, we'll check data quality and we'll check data accuracy as a basic, right? And know when when we don't need to do that, or we need to worry about that less. And by being able to wield these tools, we get to a point where people aren't cobbling together bad. I mean, someone cobbles you together a bad POC, UI, UX thing, a tool that allows you to, you know, do some automation or something, that it looks crap or it doesn't work quite as expected, and you'll see that, right? Whereas, you know, we know that it's possible to quite earnestly and accidentally manipulate data to say all sorts of bonkers things that bear no relation to the data that's underneath. And that is especially important when you start combining multiple data sets or you're trying to do more exotic cuts. And many businesses have quite chaotic data ecosystems and often some quite conceptually challenging data paradigms within their system that need to be attended to. And often not many people even know about them. These are the people that run your BI systems. These are your data scientists. It looks easy because they've automated it away in the background. In the meantime, you don't know that it's there. And you don't know that if you combine this data set and that data set, they're both roll-ups and they take different cuts of the same underlying data set. When you put them together, you've got something nonsensical, right? Or you've got double counting or something like that. And that you're not going to know that. And yeah, what you do, you've got a graph, but that graph says something completely nonsensical. Or you get a graph that says this is supposed to say sales, and that's put last week's sales at least 15% higher than the dashboard says. And then how are you going to get to the point where you then know how to roll back and understand what went wrong, right? No question asked that whether or not you in that business, knowing it like you do, that you could understand intellectually what happened there. But often it's really, really hard to trace down the provenance, trace down what particular steps need to happen to get from point A to point B, and so on. And I'd love to believe that most data environments and most businesses have a tidy sort of data lake, easy access data lake layer that you know, that democratizes data access, that dream that we've all been gunning for. And some businesses definitely do. But even then, you've got to be careful. But the reality is most businesses don't, and that you could go into any number of entry points into that data and you're in the jungle, right? And you're going to get bitten. And I think, you know, I applaud people trying to do this, but it's fraught with difficulties. And the difference between making a little UI application that doesn't work and reporting bad data could be catastrophic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting if you follow that through, even on the positive side, which is, you know, okay, well, because I've got lower barrier to entry, you know, I've pulled together little 3 or 4 steps. You know, I'm getting the right data, I'm showing something, it's doing some manipulation, pulling this out, pulling it over there, perhaps laying a sort of graphical interface over it, or even, as you say, putting together a nice macro to go into Excel. And it's great. Okay, now I've got these 4 steps. It's doing exactly what we need as a team. Perhaps a few other areas want to take a look at it. So, you know, you get a few people relying on it. And let's say it works, it's getting the correct data, and it's all good. And as we know, as we were talking about the Excel landscape over the last, you know, 30 years, it's sitting in there, it's working. People now relying on it. It's a monthly reporting or weekly reporting. People are looking at it. And it's now been running for 6 months, a year. Person that made it has left, and then suddenly it's like, oh, we want to change to it, or maybe it starts to go wrong, or even if it's going right, we want to expand. So who knows about that? Well, what are the steps? Is that documented? You know, and this is the age-old problem with Excel. All of a sudden, you know, you want to make those changes, and you've got this monster with, you know, 78 tabs on.
Don't poke the snake.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because you do. You say, well, I need that now. We've just had this you know, structural change, and I now need that report to show this slightly different product mix or whatever.
Yeah.
We've switched departments or something, and you've got to think about that. It's like, don't poke the snake. If that thing unravels, right?
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
not going back together again. You're going to get bitten, right?
Yeah.
And it's a real danger. I think there's a lot of those systems out there that people are just literally afraid to touch.
Yeah.
Let alone
Definitely.
stick an LLM on top. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
and I can see that coming. I mean, we use the Excel example. I have done exactly that. I got a great how to do this from one of the LLMs, and it was like, oh, here's some VB code to put in a macro. Now, I've never really used Excel macros because I've always been a bit exactly the thing we're talking about, which is like, well, this is pretty horrible. The first you know of it is you go to save some Excel that somebody sent you, and it says, are you aware this is a macro? And you go, no. And it gave me this macro, told me how to insert it, put it in, and it was only a little toy example, but it whacked that in, and that's great. Now I save that down. I mean, that macro is hidden, apart from the fact I think the extension is XLSM, but that macro is hidden. And even if you did know it was there, well, you go up and look into it. Well, it's code, right? I mean, I could sort of interpret it and go, oh, okay, that's quite interesting. But that's now hidden. It's there. It's producing the spreadsheets. It's whacking all these formulas in for me, which is all exactly what is needed. But in 2 years' time, when someone wants to change to that, well, who knows how to get into it, And I think a whole load of those are going to spring up I'm not sure as they should, but it solves a business problem which we have right now. Why wouldn't you use the tools you've got to solve that problem? And that's going to bring in, a whole new realm of new things are going to appear. I mean, these tools are going to create these new monsters, and which do jobs, and no one will know what they are.
That's actually dystopian. Right? And it's weird to me that I don't think I've ever actually thought about it like that, right? But in my mind, I was naively like, it's sort of a linear point from where we are now, to a point where it's sort of different, right? And people are doing things differently. But you're absolutely right. Like people are going to be creating more Frankenstein spreadsheets.
Exactly.
Right? Because they're more able to do it, because they're not making the leap to Python. And God, you can now do Python. Windows, you can do Python in Excel.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I mean, that Microsoft knows this to a degree, and that what you're going to see, I don't even know if this is better or worse than what you've just said. But like, okay, so now I've got an increasing amount of sort of Copilot-like agents. One of them sits on top of Excel. I don't know what's happening with that on Excel right now, but I can imagine we're going to get to a point where your natural language in an Excel something in one of the cells or something, and it does all that in the background. It's either doing it in VBA or Python or something.
Yeah.
And so not only did you not know what you were doing, you cut and paste this bit of VBA code that at least said on the screen, you cut it from that, here's how it works, which you may or may not have read, right? So there was at least some ability for you to have understood what was going on. Now it's going to be doing it in the background, and you can end up with these horrible chimera Frankenstein spreadsheets where there was not even the most basic amount of knowledge that it took to create that monster, and so no one will be able to fix it, and so is the Copilot layer going to be smart enough to undo its own spaghetti junction? And then you've got the fact that they've plugged in, I don't know what Microsoft's models are these days. No, they're using OpenAI, so it's ChatGPT under the surface, or some version of that, right? And so you get to this point where GPT-4 flubbed it to 80% of the weight of being half decent, but then GPT-5 has to fix that, right? Because someone wants to update it, because we did our little, adding new products or whatever.
Yeah.
And is that more? Is it going to scrub it and rewrite it, or is it going to be crap on crap?
Yeah.
Right. And because we know that the code that comes out of ChatGPT is so wildly inconsistent that you're just trusting that it does something in the background that's going to be the right thing to do, i.e. gives me the right data, that you're the sort of person that's going to double check that it's done this pivot for you that actually shows you something that represents reality, but also like mad macros off calling random data sources, and that's in any way maintainable. The idea, given that how many millions of those there are out there at the moment, the idea that there's one more fills me with horror, but you're actually telling me it's going to explode. Right, and the job of a BI manager is already a nightmare of whack-a-mole for those types of systems. And it's going to get worse before it gets better, if it gets better ever.
Well,
That's
this
the bleakest thing I've ever heard in my years working in data.
Well, this is the thing. I'm looking at this now, and I'm thinking, look, that anybody that gets a solution with AI in the mix that's working is probably going to have multiple steps, as we've talked about before. But once it's working, you're not going to say, as we well know, oh, I'm sorry, that's not architected properly. You can't have the business benefit from that. If it's business people doing this, and remember, it probably will be, because the barrier of entry will be lowered for using lots of things in any ecosystem, because you can ask ChatGPT, as we've said, to give you highly advanced Excel stuff. So, all of a sudden there's loads of barriers, and you're going to produce something, you're going to get it working, and you're not going to say, oh, that's poorly architected, we don't want the benefit of this. No, man, that is going in. And so I think these are going to explode. And then often what happens, and we've been through, it's kind of where the whole business analytics came from, is because there were systems were producing data. People were then trying to write screens, and they were always an afterthought. Oh, hold on. The point of a software system is to get your process gains. Oh, yeah, but we want to see what it's doing and understand reporting. That was always secondary. Yeah, we'll get you that in 3 years' time. And then because of that lack of, well, look, we really need to see what's going on, the analytics industry sprang up, because not only as software developers did you have to go back into the system you've written and start going, oh, well, what screens do you want? What do you want to see? And of course, people all wanted to see roughly the same things. So it's like, well, why wouldn't you have a common layer which gives you a common output across different companies? And hence, you've got a layer of software that drops in there. So that ChatGPT 5 layer, I can see coming is going to be your new Oracles and your new SAPs. You go, oh, look, we've got a layer where you plug in all your old stuff, and then you'll get this nicely re-architected layer out the top in Newspeak. That's kind of probably what we'll end up with in about 3 or 4 years. There'll be an explosion of a new layer which takes into account all of these Frankenstein's monsters which are now running.
I thought that was what the data lake was supposed to be. And how many half-finished data lake initiatives are there out there? So what we're saying now is that on one level, because your data lake isn't delivering anything yet, you've got an explosion of Excel spreadsheets, which the data lake was put in place to try and curtail. And then you're going to send in some sort of smart language model in to try and fix your data lake.
Well, maybe, yeah. And all of the steps.
And then you're going to have to design another one to fix the problem created by this explosion of spreadsheets. It all sounds like a complete horror show to me. So I did not realise where this was where this conversation was going to go.
No, indeed, it's funny, isn't it?
I sort of feel like we've talked about that like quite a lot, and we were going to talk about multiple things.
I think that's probably it. Yeah.
So I think we might need to wrap up there while I go off and quietly weep in a corner. I feel like we've got some more to cover here. I think there are some edges of this I think we intended to cover, but we didn't. I also feel like we have an episode on Excel coming. But I think we need to leave it now.
For sure.
And decide whether we can possibly bring ourselves to depress our audience anymore, and or come back with something a bit more cheerful. Maybe that's what we should do.
Well, anybody that's looking to build a new layer, which will take in all the current layers, is probably very excited right now.
Yeah, exactly. And then there will be a layer to come and have to deal with that layer, and so on, and we have an infinite regress.
Indeed, it's turtles all the way down.
It totally is, or
Excellent.
totally is. Right, on that amphibious
On
note,
that pun.
let's call it a day.
Yeah. See you next time.
Cheers.